And then let's say that sentence 1 is a premise and sentence 2 is the inference, is the conclusion. We're going to say that the last sentence is not a tautological consequence of the other or others. In other words, guys, when we're talking about a tautological consequence, we're talking about truth table validity. Yeah? So check out row 2. It's the first row where the inference, sentence 2, is false, while the premise, sentence 1, is true. And remember, we only need one such row. Is this what you're after?
You only need one such row to what?
Oh, sorry.
Like a contradiction?
To show that the inference is invalid, that the sentence is not a tautological consequence of the premise.
Oh, okay.
Right. So remember when we were working in chapter 1, or sorry, in chapter 2 with counter examples, right? So how do we show non-consequence? We build a world in which the premises are true and the conclusion is false.
Yeah, but here we have one premise, right? And one conclusion?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's do this and grab Tarski's world. And let me go ahead and erase. I love this annotating feature of Zoom, but you know, because of the way because of where it marks, it follows you everywhere. Okay, so we had, what did we have? We had, it's not the case that, I can't even remember what we had, sorry. Okay, here we go. Woohoo, I'm doing great. It's not the case that A is both a TED and a cube. And then the inference is and you'll see how easy it is to falsify this, right? This sentence. Okay. So here's my my object. Oh, whoopsie, I forgot my parenthesis, my close paren, right? So what I've just built could be row 2, 3, or 4, but all I needed, does this make sense now? I think Farzan, it was you who was asking the question. Does it make sense that all I needed was one iteration of a false conclusion while the premise is true in order to show that the inference is invalid, right?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay. Good. Okay, so now what I want to do, just because it's I think it'll be worth it to us to sort of start laying the foundation, is to show how Fitch, and we were talking about this during office hours, right? So this should be, I hope, a good reinforcement for you. We're going to show how Fitch will work a truth table in the background when we use the following mechanism, the TautCon mechanism. So I'm going to take the same set of sentences. So it's not the case that A is both a cube and, or sorry, a TED and a cube. And then I'm going to claim that A is both a TED and a cube. Okay, so even though we have on the to the right of the inference which is at line 2. We're not actually using a rule when we do the following. So I cite line 1 because I'm saying that line 2 is derived from line 1, and then I say that line 2 is a tautological consequence of line 1. So suppose I didn't know that 1 and 2 are contradictory claims, right? And this can be useful when you're working really complicated arguments. Or rephrase, when you're confronted with a really complicated argument and you want to know if the thing is truth table valid, you want to know if the inference is a tautological consequence, you cite the number or numbers of relevant animals, and then you click the check button and notice you get an X. So when I click that check button, what was happening, what Fitch was doing in the background was running a truth table. Isn't that cool?
Oh.
People are like, yeah, that's great, Mia. It's totally awesome. Okay, but now let's go ahead and go back to our original equivalence sentence, right? So just so that we're clear, this is what we had.
I got a quick question.
Yeah, Deb.
Using the Fitch, do you have to cite all the premises when you're using that tautological consequence?
Great question. Yes, so we're going to see a couple of ways in which we can and want to use TautCon. What we've just used it for is one way, which is, hey, I want to see if this inference follows via a truth table. And in that case, what you do is, if you have a bunch of premises, you just cite them all, right? When you're dealing with TautCon within the context of an existing derivation, you would cite only those line numbers that are relevant to the question, is the sentence a tautological consequence of these other 2, right? At most 3. But you'll notice that when we're using a rule, an inference rule like we did, let's say back in chapter 2, we will never cite more than 2 single lines. And that's because of the way that the sort of analytical way that derivations proceed. We're analyzing down to the, if you will, the smallest elements of an argument, right? So that we end up with, at the very least 1 justificatory line, and at the most 2. We will see as we go forward, we'll cite subproofs, but we'll get to that. But great question, Deb. Okay, so if we go back then to our original equivalence, right? We had false, true, and then we had, oh, sorry, I had these wrong. False, true. So false, true. Okay, so remember we said that, reassess. We know that when 2 sentences are tautologically equivalent, not only is it the case that in this case the second is a consequence of the first is also a consequence of the second. Why? What's my problem? Oh, I wrote not last. Sorry, guys. Okay. So now let's come back to Fitch, right? So what we're going to do is match so here again, so I've already cited line 1, and I've said that the second sentence is a tautological consequence. Now I get a check mark because Fitch has run this algorithm, if you will, in the background. What do you guys think?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So one thing we'll find when we're deep into chapter 6, and then we go into chapter 8, where we will have introduced 2 more connectives. We want to understand that these equivalences mean that one sentence can be substituted for another, and that can be very useful in a derivation. Now, in some versions of the system that we're learning, this substitution or replacement is used as a rule, not in the version that we're learning. So yes, this one set of equivalences is one of 2 so-called De Morgan's equivalences, and when we use them as justifications in a proof sequence, we say, oh, we De Morganize the sentence. We don't do that. We don't have that as a rule in our version of the system, but that doesn't mean that we can't still use TautCon. Okay, so are we okay so far with expressly and implicitly having revisited our truth definitions for our first 3 operators, our first 3 connectives? Are we comfortable with the basics of setting up a truth table using bool, right? And then how we can start to see what the truth table, lets us do, what its power is.
Are we going to do a little bit more review come Thursday?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that I want to do on Thursday is to work as many examples as possible that range across the concepts that we've just been talking about, and then go specifically into the exam and say, okay, you guys will say something like, okay, Mia's asking me to do X, Y, and Z. Let's practice more what it is to do X, Y, and Z. And then, of course,
exactly.
And then what we want to do is move into to chapter 6, which is built directly on the back, if you will, of the truth table. So it'll be a nice way to see how we can use what the truth table does for us in terms of some sophisticated derivations.